Other times we thought, well, this wouldn't be what should be discussed on a Monday morning, but sadly enough, Bank PHB, Afribank and Spring Bank, they say, well, it's all history now. Joining us to look at amcon and bank ownership this morning is Mr. Sopitan, is a financial and management consultant. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Well, we saw the headline, and even it was on the weekend, and we thought, sometimes in Nigeria, such stories don't even come on a weekend. But it happened on a weekend. But anyway, we saw it coming, but not so soon. Well, they say step one, well, CBN revoked licenses of Afribank, Bank PHB, and Spring Bank because of their inability to recapitalize. And step two, NDIC takes over the banks and creates 3 bridge banks, which we've now seen as Keystone, as well as Main Street and the other name. But again, amcon acquires the bridge banks and will inject the needed capital to keep them afloat, now owned by federal government. Is that what they call nationalized banks?
I really wish I could understand what is going on in the system. I mean, this is a country that...
Are you confused as well?
I am. To be quite candid. Because, I mean, look, it is this culture of arbitrariness that has actually pervaded the land. These banks were given up to the end of September to recapitalize. And it's a process. It's not at all they should run their businesses on the pages of newspaper. I mean, maybe they should be rendering returns to the CBN and all that. But for God's sake, you gave them up to the end of September to do something.
But having given them that, you're studying how they are going about it, because I'm saying, or the CBN says they have studied the processes that they are going by, and based on those processes, they cannot meet up that September 30 date.
Why don't we wait until that time? You gave them that time. We had the same situation with the microfinance banks some time back. The CBN went to these banks, examined them, they spotted some weaknesses, gave them some time to now rectify those weaknesses. And before that time was up, they yanked up their licenses, only to come and restore. They yanked up 224, and they restored 121 later. And rather than admit that they made a mistake, they were trying to play God, to say that, okay, they were now giving them approvals in principle. Look, the financial system of this country is not the business of one single person. I hope they won't end up pulling the whole house down on all of us. These banks were given up till September ending to do something. What's the hurry about? Wait until that time, and then you can yank up their license.
What if the chances were that they might not be able to support themselves to the end of that deadline? What should the CBN do? Sit and look?
I would be told that they cannot support themselves until that deadline, of course. Look, I'm saying that if those will go to court now, they probably will have a case. I met an executive of Afribank yesterday. Yesterday. And he said they were in discussion with certain people. Yeah, we've seen others on the pages of newspapers telling us what they've been doing with others and all that.
We've seen a host of mergers.
They were mergers and all that.
Yes.
But they look, we have to condemn this issue of arbitrariness, because I just gave you the instance of the microfinance banks, and that action dealt a mortal blow to that sector, because people lost confidence in and there's so much knee-jerk decisions being taken in the CBN. Now, last year the banks were asked to close down the ATMs that were not in their premises and all that. Suddenly, because we now want to have a cashless society, the banks are being asked to now deploy as many ATMs as possible. Why don't we just have some consistency? Let people sit down and give a thorough thought to policies before they actually get enunciated.
Mr. Sopitan, maybe you should tell us how it really works, because you were with the central bank in 1962 and you left in 1996 as a deputy director.
Yes.
And of course, you spent the last 15 years as bank examiner with the CBN.
I was in banking supervision department.
Banking supervision. So how does it operate? You call it a knee-jerk approach, and people. The headline yesterday was that there's this panic
Naturally.
amongst investors. Naturally, how should we have gone about it? If you were in CBN, what should have been the ideal thing to do?
I don't know what's going on there now. I mean, I think, for instance, that the CBN governor forgets himself so much in the media. He needs to sit down and do the job in the office. Let the corporate affairs people go on and start talking about it. He's been talking too much. And he needs to really sit down. I did say that we need to really look at the implications of the various decisions that have been taken. Now, we have been told that nobody is going to lose his cover and all that, but there's this panic that's been created in the system. People are now running all over the place trying to get their money out of the... Then what happens to the investors, the shareholders of these banks and all that? There has been so much noise about. There's need for some maturity in handling issues.
So tell us your understanding between AMCON, the difference between AMCON and NDIC, the Asset Management Company of Nigeria, and the NDIC.
The NDIC, the AMCON was set up to take care of the toxic assets of the banks that were in trouble. And the NDIC really comes in only when the bank has been liquidated. Then they go out there as the undertaker. They ensure that particularly the depositors don't lose out. They are empowered to pay some monies to start with, and they go on to realize the assets of the bank. That bank is dead. Whereas as for AMCON is actually to support this bank to see them, grow. They buy, the banks ran into problems because they had these toxic assets that were not performing, and again, we laid the foundation for that. I mean, that's another issue altogether.
No, how?
Now, it is, I always said on this medium that the consolidation thing was ill-timed. Everybody was, whining over it, but I thought it was not the ideal time to have the consolidation that we had then. You needed to have some degree of stability in the system. Infrastructure was really core. It was key. Because I did say then that you were talking of mega banks in the Bolekaja economy. Mega banks are supposed to grow the economy. They support the productive sector. Now, our factories were closing down in Nigeria because they had no electricity. They were relocating. And these are the banks that were supposed to be supported by the mega banks. They are people to whom they should lend money to really make them grow.
Yes, the companies that should be supported by the country central banks. As it may, it seems a bit confusing for a host of people. When AMCON was set up to soak up those toxic assets, they did pump in. In fact, when the 5 banks initially were rescued by the CBN, they pumped in about $400 million into those banks. And then subsequently, AMCON was set up to soak up toxic assets, which they did. So how come this bank still didn't survive?
Maybe that's the question they should be answering. The CBN people should be answering, because the essence of the AMCON was for them to take off those toxic assets from the banks and gradually make them, because a lot of the assets they took off, they needed. A lot of them had collaterals and all that. The idea was that you will now take off these toxic assets, negotiate with the borrowers. Now a lot of them had collaterals, which would be realized to ensure that. And the idea of the AMCON was to have, I know what happens in other places, that they have a vehicle whereby they will now eventually sell shares to the public. And as they operate, they will be able to use their profits and whatever, the earnings to really clean up the system.